All right, so are you ready to dive into some seriously spooky stuff?
Oh, yeah. Always up for a good mystery.
Well, perfect, because today we're tackling one of the biggest enigmas in literary history,
Hmm. Let me guess.
the death of Edgar Allan Poe.
Ah, the master of the macabre himself.
Exactly, the guy who practically invented spooky season.
And whose death is almost as spooky as his stories.
Right, it's like life imitating art, but in the creepiest way possible.
So where are we going with this deep dive?
We're going beyond just the typical biographical stuff, you know?
Okay.
Yeah, we're looking at an academic paper that examines Poe's death
Interesting.
through the lens of folklore and contemporary legends.
Folklore, huh? So like how these stories and rumors tell us about ourselves.
Yeah, and about our cultural anxieties almost more than they tell us about Poe himself.
I can see that.
But before we get all deep into the mystery,
Right.
we gotta set the stage.
Okay, back to basics.
Yeah, I mean, Poe's life was basically a Gothic novel waiting to happen.
Oh, absolutely. Born in 1809, his life was full of tragedy from the start.
Yeah, it's like he was cursed or something.
Abandoned by his father, orphaned young, bounced around foster homes.
And then even when he found success as a writer,
He was still plagued by financial problems and whispers of substance abuse.
the guy could never catch a break.
It's true.
But here's the weird part. It's like his afterlife has been even bigger than his actual life.
That's an interesting way to put it.
I mean, his face is everywhere.
Oh, yeah. For sure, scholarly books, movies.
Even on a Beatles album cover,
It's kind of ironic, isn't it?
the master of the macabre becoming even more influential in death.
Totally. And his writing, with its focus on urban settings
Yeah.
and all those themes of death and isolation,
It's like he foreshadowed the strangeness of his own demise.
almost like he was writing his own legend.
Totally, even if he didn't mean to.
Hmm.
But okay, let's get to the heart of it.
The death itself.
Yeah, 1849, Poe dies at just 40 years old.
Oh, and young.
What are the facts as far as we know them?
Okay, so the bare bones are Poe disappeared from Richmond, Virginia. Yep. Only to reappear days later in Baltimore, delirious and
Wait, hold on, delirious.
yeah, and wearing someone else's clothes.
What? Someone else's clothes? That's bizarre.
It is right. And then 4 days later, he was gone.
So we've got a disappearance, a reappearance, a mysterious wardrobe change.
Sounds like the setup for one of his stories.
Totally. And to make things even more confusing,
There's more.
we have these conflicting accounts from the doctors who treated him.
Dr. Snodgrass and Dr. Moran
Yeah, they couldn't even agree on what his condition was like in those final days.
adds another layer to the mystery.
Plus, no autopsy was performed in the official cause of death.
Congestion of the brain.
I mean, what does that even mean?
Right. It's practically an invitation to speculate.
And people haven't hesitated to do just that.
Not at all. Over the years, there's been a whole spectrum of proposed causes.
It's like everyone wants to solve the puzzle.
Yeah, from the plausible to the totally out there.
I've heard some pretty wild theories.
Like what?
Oh, heart disease, rabies, even murder?
Those are pretty standard.
Oh, but have you heard about the cooping theory?
Cooping.
Yeah, the idea that Poe was kidnapped and forced to vote multiple times.
For the same candidate. That's crazy.
I know, right?
But I guess it goes to show how badly people want an explanation.
Even if it's far-fetched.
And it's interesting how some of these theories reflect the anxieties of the time.
Meh.
Well, cooping, for instance, was a real concern back then, especially during elections.
So it makes sense that it would find its way into the Poe narrative.
Exactly. The mystery becomes this blank canvas for people to project their fears onto.
And their fascinations too, right?
Absolutely. And one of the most fascinating examples is the brain tumor theory.
The brain tumor theory.
Yeah, based on examinations of Poe's exhumed remains.
Wait, they dug him up to try and solve this?
They did, but the evidence is pretty shaky.
So maybe the desire for a dramatic explanation got in the way of the facts?
It's possible. We can't resist a good mystery, especially when it involves someone like Poe.
And speaking of mysteries, have you ever heard of the Poe toaster?
Oh yeah, the mysterious figure who would visit Poe's grave every year.
Leaving roses and cognac. Now that's a dedicated fan.
It's more than just fan appreciation, though.
What do you mean?
This ritual, which went on for over 50 years, shows how Poe's death became folklore.
Like a legend.
Exactly. It's like something out of one of his stories, a cloaked figure.
Wait, they wore a cloak?
Yeah, appearing in the dead of night, their face hidden,
Spooky.
paying homage to the master of the macabre.
And no one ever got a good look at them.
Nope, always shrouded in mystery. And it gets even weirder.
Weirder. How?
In 1993, a note was left at the grave.
A note? What did it say?
It suggested that the original Poe toaster had passed the torch.
Pass the torch, like it was some kind of secret society.
Maybe a family tradition? Who knows?
That's creepy. And the Edgar Allan Poe Society of Baltimore?
They only recognize the original toaster or their chosen successors.
Wow. They're really playing up the mystery.
It's brilliant marketing, though. Keeps people talking about Poe.
True.
Yeah.
Even those who haven't read his work.
Which leads us to a key question. How did all of this, the theories, the toaster, the whole mystique, contribute to the legend of Edgar Allan Poe?
Yeah, it's like his death became this like cultural touchstone or something. Like a way for us to deal with our own fears about, the unknown.
Yeah, definitely. And you were talking about folklore and contemporary legends before. Could you explain that a bit more?
Sure. So it's like some stories, even if they're not officially true,
Right.
they get passed down and kind of reflect what a culture is thinking about or afraid of.
Exactly. Like those stories about alligators in the sewers.
Uh-huh. Yeah, exactly. Totally made up.
But they tap into our fears about what's hiding beneath the surface.
So how does Poe's death fit into that?
Well, his death is a prime example of a contemporary legend.
Okay.
His work already kind of set us up to be fascinated by this kind of stuff.
Like how?
Remember all those recurring themes in his stories? Premature burial,
Oh, yeah.
the blurring of reality and dreams, fear of the unknown.
It's like he created the blueprint for how we would interpret his death.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And our source even points out that Poe himself was obsessed with being buried alive.
Seriously?
Yeah, that fear echoes through a lot of the theories about his death.
It's almost too perfect, isn't it?
Yeah. The guy who wrote The Premature Burial?
And then people speculate about whether that actually happened to him,
It's like his fiction bled into reality.
making it impossible to separate the man from the myth.
Right, and that blurring of lines is what makes contemporary legends so powerful.
I see what you mean.
They tap into those universal anxieties we have.
About death.
Yeah. And the unknown, the possibility of things happening that we can't control.
So these legends about Poe aren't really just about Poe himself.
No, they're about how we as a culture interact with stories.
Okay.
And how those stories shape our perception of reality.
So basically the mystery keeps his work alive.
Yeah, even if we never get a definitive answer.
That's interesting. It's funny. Poe wasn't really seen as a literary giant during his lifetime.
True.
But now he's this cultural icon, practically a requirement in American literature.
It's quite a transformation.
How did that happen?
Well, our source suggests that Poe's posthumous fame.
Posthumous meaning after death, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's partly because of American critics who championed his work after he died.
They saw something special in his writing.
Yeah, and they wanted to position him as a national writer, especially after he became popular in Europe.
Really, Europe liked him first.
Yeah, thanks in part to translations by Charles Baudelaire.
Oh, wow, the French poet.
Yep. So these American critics, they were trying to reclaim him.
Make him a symbol of American literature.
Exactly. Even though Poe's work rarely focuses on specifically American settings.
So it was more about the tone, the themes, the darkness.
Exactly. They saw those things as somehow reflecting the American experience.
Interesting. But not everyone agreed with this view of Poe, right?
Of course not.
Yeah.
Even today, some see him as an outsider and eccentric.
Some find his work too morbid.
Yeah, lacking a consistent view of life, as T.S. Eliot put it.
Oh, wow, T.S. Eliot.
Yep. But even that criticism fuels the legend in a way. It reinforces that image of Poe as the brooding genius misunderstood in his own time.
I get it. And it also highlights the tension between high culture and low culture.
The academic view of Poe versus his popularity in more mainstream circles.
So the debate continues.
It does, and it adds another layer to the whole conversation about his place in American literature.
It's like everyone has their own Poe, their own interpretation of his work.
And that's what makes it so fascinating to study from a folkloric perspective.
Okay, I'm starting to see the bigger picture here.
Good. We can observe how these narratives about Poe change over time.
Right.
Then we reflect not just the man himself, but the changing cultural landscape as well.
So what does this all mean for us, the listeners?
That's a good question. I think it reminds us that stories have power.
Especially those based on legends and folklore.
Right. They tap into our deepest fears, our fascination with the unknown.
And they help us deal with big questions.
About life and death.
And the fact that we're still talking about Poe,
Centuries later.
trying to unravel the mystery of his death, shows how much his work has resonated with us.
Absolutely. Whether we're conscious of it or not.
It makes you wonder, would Poe have achieved this level of fame if his death had been normal?
It's hard to say.
I mean, he was obviously talented, but...
The mystery definitely adds a certain allure.
No doubt. It's almost like the mystery is part of his artistic legacy. It's weird, right? Like, you think about all those creepy urban settings in Poe's stories.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, those settings almost foreshadow the mystery of his death.
How so?
Well, we picture him lost in this dark maze of city streets, you know?
Oh, I see what you mean. Succumbing to these forces beyond his control.
Exactly. And Poe's a city guy through and through, wasn't he?
Oh, absolutely. His writing captures those classic anxieties about city life.
The crowds, the anonymity.
Yeah, that feeling of being surrounded but totally isolated at the same time.
And doesn't that resonate with us on some level?
Oh, totally.
I mean, think about how you feel walking alone in a city at night.
Right. You never know what's lurking around the corner.
Exactly. Those primal fears about the city getting lost, disappearing, encountering danger.
They're all there in Poe's work, and by extension, in the legends about his death.
So it's like he tapped into this universal unease about the urban experience.
Yeah, something that keeps us fascinated and maybe even a little bit scared.
It goes beyond just curiosity, though, wouldn't you say?
Oh, for sure.
This fascination with Poe's death, it's almost ritualistic.
That's an interesting way to put it.
Like a need to revisit the scene of the crime, even though we don't know what actually happened.
I see what you mean. Like those Poe toasters making their pilgrimage to his grave every year.
Right. Or even just the tourists who visit his former homes, the places associated with his last days.
Exactly. Like retracing his steps somehow brings us closer to understanding the mystery.
Even if we never get all the answers.
Right. It's the journey, not the destination.
Uh-huh. Exactly. So the big question is, do you think we'll ever know what really happened to Poe?
That's a tough one. There's always a chance that new evidence could pop up.
Oh, yeah, like a long-lost diary or something.
Oh, right. But honestly, I think the mystery is going to stick around.
Maybe that's okay, though.
You think?
Well, we've been talking about how this uncertainty, the speculation, it's become so central to Poe's image.
Yeah, that's true.
Keeps him relevant. It keeps us talking about him.
It keeps his work alive in our cultural imagination.
Exactly. So maybe the mystery is actually a good thing.
Maybe you're right.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
So if you're as fascinated by this as we are,
Definitely.
there's tons of info out there about Poe's life and work and all the theories surrounding his death.
It's a rabbit hole worth exploring.
Absolutely. And before we go, I have to share one last detail from our source.
Okay, what's that?
So despite all the morbid fascination with his death,
Right.
just a year before he died, Poe wrote, "My health is better, best. I have never been so well."
Wow. That's kind of eerie.
Talk about a final twist.
It really adds another layer to the enigma.
With Poe, you never really know what to believe.
That's for sure.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the mystery of Edgar Allan Poe's death.
My pleasure.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those candles burning.